Let's move on because we have a couple about like 10, 15 minutes left. Let's talk about Anton Harrison for Oklahoma, 6'4", 315, 34-inch arms. He only had 89 true pass sets last year. Gave up 5 pressures, 146 in football in efficiency. So question mark here is, in an Oklahoma offense, how much are you doing what you are going to do at the NFL level? And, does that make the projection a lot harder?
I'd like you to answer that, to be honest with you, because I know you have a feeling about it and a strong feeling about it. Because being a Nebraska guy, you're gonna wax poetic
The,
about
the, the
this.
hard part about Nebraska is so when I was going there, we switched from the Big 12 to the Big 10. And Nebraska has this problem where they're not tough enough to be in the Big 10 and they're not fast enough to be in the Big 12. So that's why they're not particularly good. But the hard part here is that when you have a guy at that position that hasn't done what he's going to do at the NFL level, as you would imagine, it's just really difficult to project him, right? So a couple years ago, it's Mekhi Becton of Louisville, where he literally had like less than 50 snaps or something that were pass protection snaps that were anything like NFL snaps. And you're just saying, well, I'm going off of pure athleticism here, and we'll see how it happens. And with Becton, like the jury's still out because he's been hurt the whole time. With Anton Harrison, like I think that there's still a lot of questions. He size wise he's there. I think athleticism wise he's there. But the question is can he play the position, which is what you're paying him to do if you draft him that high.
And he's young, right? I believe he's quite young. I don't know if you have it there in front of you. I should have known that. I swear that's what I had read and when I was doing some studies on him. Yes, his ability. Everything you do when you're in a situation like that is pure projection. We know that. That's not rocket science. You hope, and many times you feel comfortable if you have the right scouts within your group that are working on this position. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this. A lot of teams, once they get through the fall and they're evaluating the players, they hone in on a position, right? I think I've mentioned it before. If you have 2 or 3 really good O-line scouts like that are specializing on O-line after they get through their area and regional visits during the year, it's a good thing to know that you're a GM and a head coach. You're really relying on those guys to do the digging and do the projecting. It's a big thing, right? Because you are hanging out there. You're hanging out there once again because of systems that you're discussing. But you're going on pure athleticism, pure explosiveness, strength. The makeup of the player is a really important thing. And we've drafted people like that before. No question, meaning they'll work well. You just, in my mind, have to make sure they have the makeup. They're going to want to work at it as well. Yeah,
for sure. And do you think so? Harrison, by the way, turned 21 in February, so he's young. Like we're talking about a guy who's going to be not even 22 the whole rookie season. So there's ran a 4.98 in the 40. That's fast, as we talk about Robert Gallery all those years ago. One thing that's interesting, and you were a GM long enough and you had enough success, you can probably answer this question. Are there places for are there seasons for developmental times, right? Where we talk about Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah last year, like basically re-upped all of his veterans, tried to get on the green, tried to win right away, and then, he's going to figure it out later. And then, there are like the Kansas City Chiefs who trade their best player. They get 10 draft picks. They get younger. Are there and this is probably, for our modeling too, if you think about it, like, are there seasons of development for teams where they can take different profiles of development for players?
Yes. You're just, I want to make sure I got this. You're saying within the program that they're going to be able to take a wave of different levels of the development.
Yeah. So like if I'm like, let's say even let's even reduce this down to the offensive line room because, and we're going to write an article for Sumer Sports about offensive line coaches. I did for the Cool Clinic, I did a study and we presented it for PFF. Like I'm having been in an offensive line room as a tight end, like those are my people. I'm very like, what if you offensive line, let's say you have a veteran coach, like let's say you have a Dante Scarnecchia or a Stoutman or what, or a Bill Callahan or somebody like that, Nebraska legend Bill Callahan, by the way. If you have Bill Callahan or somebody and you have 4 veteran linemen, you're more likely to be able to take in a young player and nurture that player versus, like, let's say you're a first year, or you have somebody like, I look at Detroit because they had Jeff Davidson for forever, and then they went with Hank Fraley, who was a former lineman in the league, and he's like early in his career. If your coach is young and like a couple of your cornerstone players like Penei Sewell or so on are young, do you opt against drafting a guy and bring in veterans? Like, do you care about the composition of that room age-wise?
Well, I to your point, and sorry for not picking it up right away, I am a firm believer, and you do have all the different pieces there in your game, whether it's chess, whatever it may be, as an O-line coach, as an offensive coordinator, and a head coach, right? Along with the GM to decide exactly where you're thriving and where you're not. If you have an experienced O-line coach, but you have a number of rookies, of course, you might want to fold in a veteran guy. And quite honestly, that veteran guy could be a little bit long in the tooth. Not really sure what that means. I've used that before, and it's an old-fashioned phrase, but that is something that ends up happening, right? You just have to look at all the different pieces that you have there and decide if you do have a number of older guys along the line. It's pretty darn cool to be able to bring in a young guy and indoctrinate them right away. I feel like a guy like Lindstrom, when he came into Atlanta, he was around some guys that had something to him, right? With Alex Mack being in there and Jake Long, and there were guys throughout there that I thought were really good for him. And I think that's an important thing. So yes, you look at your entire unit, and it's not just O-line, as you said, it's every unit. And you try to get creative with how you can not only have the personality makeup, but at times it's nice to stage where the contracts are coming up, of course.
And you just said what I was going to say, which is also like when the contracts come up, because like if they all come up at the same time, then you're going to lose some guys, right? Just you can't sign everybody. And so you need some staggering just, in that way, even though like, and this was, back when I was a sports bettor, like it was offensive line ability mattered about the same as offensive line continuity. Right. And so, when I looked at your line, in Atlanta, and I don't want to besmirch this player at all, but like Chris Chester, like never graded well for us. He was always kind of the 5th best guy in your line, but he played on your team for a bunch of years in a row. And you're like, okay, well, this guy is clearly not affecting your offense negatively. But he's there, and the continuity matters, right? And so there's a part of that too, where that's a huge part of like being, being a functional offensive line. It's not all the guys can be top end players because you got to pay them all that.
Well, look, it's funny. When he was coming up to retire, it was a little bit of a sore spot for us. We were wondering whether he was going to retire or not. We knew that it was time for him to retire, but you're never really ready because you're like, gosh, he had so much experience. He got along with the guys really well. He had his own leadership element to him. He was at the tail end of it all, of course, but he probably could have continued to play, and it might have been a little bit of a load off of our mind, and then we wouldn't have gone in and tried to press some of the the need that we had in some of the free agent signings we had, because we were looking for someone drastically to replace. But no, Chris had his place for us for sure, right? There are guys that do have that. They could be the fourth.
Not every player on every team. I mean, because of the salary cap, not every player can be an amazing player, and some players have to be, basically net value of 0, but they play up to their contract. And sometimes, in a perfect world, every player plays up to their contract, but then there's some players that don't have high contracts, and so they're not going to play that high. That's just the way it works, and that's okay. And that you have to accept that, especially in these weak link systems where it's about your weakest link playing better than their potential because of the players around them. And